Welcome back to Tethered and Whole. I'm your host, Matt Weld, and today we're talking about something that most of us rarely get enough of, often avoid, and sometimes even fear just a little bit: silence. And I don't mean the absence of noise. I mean the presence of quiet. Silence that makes room for us. Silence that reveals the things we think we don't have time to hear. Silence that invites clarity, presence, and connection. Today's episode explores why silence matters, what science says about it, and how we can use it. Yes, even in busy, noisy schools, how we can use it to support our own well-being and the well-being of the people around us. So let me start with a story. At age 27, Gordon Hempton was driving from Washington State to Madison, Wisconsin, ready to begin a degree in plant pathology. Somewhere along the road, he pulled off, walked into a field, and lay down as a thunderstorm rolled overhead. And he listened. When the storm passed, Hempton realized he had never truly listened before, not with his whole attention, not with his whole presence. And that moment changed the trajectory of his life. Instead of becoming a plant pathologist, Hempton devoted himself to acoustic ecology. He began traveling the world to capture the sound of dawn on every continent. He discovered a Hawaiian volcano where the landscape absorbs sound so intensely that decibels can drop into the negative. And through all that listening, he realized something else. Silence itself is becoming endangered, not metaphorically, literally. And the science backs him up. One study found that animals in an African watering hole fear human voices twice as much as they fear a lion's roar. Think about that. The apex predator of the savannah is us. Noise changes ecosystems. It changes behavior, and it changes us. Yet humans often crave noise. Many of us turn on the TV the second we get home. Silence feels unfamiliar, maybe even unsafe. But what happens when we let silence back in? Years ago, I worked as a counselor for school groups in Quetico Provincial Park in Ontario. As counselors, we followed two rules. Number one, practice no trace camping. And number two, use what we called Quetico voices. Because sound travels farther over water, students were asked to speak at half of their inside voice. It was almost always the hardest rule to follow. Kids were used to hallway chatter and cafeteria roar, and they found it challenging to lower their volume, to talk softly enough that the loons didn't scatter and the forest didn't react. But something happened by the end of the week. They got quieter. They saw more wildlife. They noticed more. And the most important change wasn't outside, it was inside. As their outer voices softened, their inner voices got louder. Silence has a way of doing that. It clears the dust that's been floating in our minds. It brings forward the things we've been too busy, too distracted, or too stressed to hear. Now, I know silence isn't always comfortable. As a teacher, I used to tell my students that I was trained to wait 3 seconds after asking a question. That small pause made room for thinking. It made room for voices that weren't the fastest or the loudest. And now, when I present to adults, the same thing happens. If I resist the urge to fill the space, if I let silence sit, someone almost always speaks up with exactly the insight the room needed. Silence gives people space to process, reflect, and connect. This is what some people mean when they talk about holding space, creating a moment or environment where people feel psychologically safe enough to think deeply and to speak honestly. And in classrooms, silence is just as powerful as instruction. Students need quiet moments to let new information settle, to make connections, to hear their own thinking. A pause after a question lets the deeper answer emerge. A minute of silent writing gives ideas shape. Shared silence can communicate respect, calm, and focus more effectively than a dozen reminders to pay attention. In a world that constantly demands attention, silence becomes a gift, a tool, practice, a leadership strategy. I've found that silence is especially powerful in 3 areas. The first one is apologies. Say you're sorry and then stop. Every word after you say apologize begins the apology. Explanations turn into excuses and rationalizations turn into justifications. And the metaphorical hole that you're already in becomes deeper and deeper with each word. But silence, quiet, grounded silence, keeps the apology pure. The second one, centering yourself. Our minds chatter constantly. Silence helps us hear what's underneath the noise. Even 30 seconds of quiet breathing can interrupt rumination, lower arousal, and bring us back into a regulated state. That's the space where clarity lives, folks. That's where intentional action begins. The third area where I find silence helps is building trust. Trust depends on listening, and listening depends on quiet. Some of the most meaningful moments in relationships aren't filled with words. They're shared in silence, in the pause that says, I'm here. I'm with you. I'm not rushing this. Silence can create connection faster than perfectly scripted dialogue. It's not always easy because most of us really like to talk. Sometimes just sitting in supportive silence next to someone, it's exactly what they need. So how do we reclaim silence in a world that's constantly buzzing, pinging, and interrupting? By building what I call silence stamina. Here's a simple practice you can start today. Find a quiet place where you can be comfortable. Eliminate the noise you can control. Turn off notifications. Shut the door if you can. Close your eyes or soften your gaze. Breathe. Follow your breath with your mind's eye as it moves in and out. When your attention drifts, and it will, notice it, name it, and gently bring your focus back to your breath. No judgment. In the beginning, it might feel like all you're doing is redirecting your attention. And honestly, that's the practice. That's the muscle that's being strengthened. So start with 1 minute. Then increase the time as your stamina grows. Silence isn't emptiness. It's an invitation, a doorway back into yourself. As we wrap up today's episode, I want to invite you to notice the moments of silence in your day. Not just the absence of noise, but the presence of possibility. Those gaps, those pauses hold power. Power to think, to connect, to choose who we are and how we show up. Silence isn't something to avoid, it's something to reclaim. So, thanks for joining me today on Tethered and Whole. Until next time, may you find quiet moments that ground you, guide you, and remind you of who you are. I'll see you next time.